Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories of everyday people and their families. I endeavour to continue publishing episodes ad-free. In order to do so, I would love your support by reviewing my podcast or consider becoming a subscriber for only the cost of a coffee a month. This gives you early access to episodes and also access to bonus episodes, of which at this stage there's over 30. Episode 186, Wirth Circus. Part 2. Now to the circus. The four brothers carried on by themselves after their father's death, and Madeline and Millie also joined them. On New Year's Eve 1880, John and Sarah's four boys commenced their own little tent show in Sydney, and by 1882 had formed a small circus. In the Goulburn Evening Penny Post, on the 29th of March 1884, it says, "The band of Wirth brothers attached to a travelling company played at the Circua show throughout the day excellently." They then commenced in Ballarat on their first provincial tour and went to Ararat in 1885 and then Adelaide as their first capital city. They added to and improved their show until 1887 that they could claim that the Wirths was the largest circus in the country. On the 19th of April 1888 in the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate, it says, "The performance of the talented Wirth family and their horses attracted last night another immense audience, which found ample accommodation in the new and magnificent tent just received from Sydney. Every part of the spacious arena was crammed. It was an old and true saying that a circus of any kind always draws in Newcastle, and when such a program was put forward as that given last night, we do not wonder at it. There is not a moment's cessation between the acts, and no vexatious delays. The company appeared to have fairly settled down to work in their new locality, and the applause was loud and frequent. The daring and skilful acts of Miss Margaret Wirth, Miss Madeline Wirth, and Mr. George Wirth are deserving of all praise, and may be considered the gems of the entertainment. To these must be added the drolleries and witticisms of Mr. John Wirth and his compeers in merriment. The entertainment was very successful in every respect, but we understand that a complete change of program will be produced this evening. As the circus will only remain in Newcastle a few days, we advise the admirers of equestrian performers to make the most of this opportunity." By 1889, the Wirth Circus had grown considerably and was touring New Zealand when Harry Wirth, returning from a trip to America, brought back a troupe of Wild West performers and, inspired from seeing Barnum and Bailey's famous circus, persuaded his brothers to set up their own three-ring circus. They adopted rail transport in their tour through Victoria into Adelaide, and the crowds flocked to see their arrival and unloading of the circus train wherever it went. In 1888, the Wirths visited New Caledonia, and then in 1890 New Zealand. With the Australian banking crisis of 1893, the Wirths undertook a 7-year odyssey and took the circus to South America, England, South Africa again, India and Java, and whilst giving a performance in October 1895 at Montevideo in Uruguay, the Politima Theatre burnt down and was completely destroyed. Returning to South Africa, they found the Second Boer War in progress, but made their neutrality clear. But on one occasion, the circus train narrowly missed demolition as the Boers were about to blow a bridge over the Motor River. They then headed to England, where they staged a successful tour before setting up a permanent building in Southport, where they performed for Edward, Prince of Wales, later Edward VII. The troupe returned to Perth, Western Australia in August 1900, picking up the first of their famous elephant herd along the way. They found they'd almost been forgotten in their home country, so they travelled extensively by horse-drawn wagon and special trains around Australia. In 1901, May Wirth became the adopted daughter of Mary to become the greatest bareback riding star. She was later inducted in 1963 into the Circus Hall of Fame, and a bonus episode has been created on May, bonus episode number 34. The deaths of John Jr. in 1894 and Harry in 1895 left the control to Philip and George and their sister Millie. They soon revived their reputation, and Wirth Circus became for many years a household name in all parts of Australia. In 1901, the Arts Centre site on St Kilda Road in Melbourne became home to a permanent circus called Olympia that was originally built by the Fitzgerald's Brothers Circus. Olympia was an octagonal circus building. In 1904, the area of the site not occupied by the Fitzgeralds was developed into a fashionable meeting place called Princess Court. This area featured a Japanese tea house, an open-air theatre, a miniature train, a water chute and a 15-member military band. A 1903 Wirth Circus program, in a tent that held 400 people comfortably with electric light, included Philip's daughter Phyllis performing on horseback like a human butterfly, Philip Wirth taking the snow-white stallion Moncrief through paces, and Mary Wirth undertaking juggling on horseback. Their bitter rivals were the Fitzgerald Brothers Circus, although this subsided in 1906 with the death of the Fitzgerald brothers. So at this time the Wirths acquired the Fitzgerald Circus and took over the entire site from Fitzgerald's and remained there for 50 years. The Princess Court Amusement Park was also acquired and merged, and it became Wirth's Pleasure Park. In 1907, the Wirths leased the Olympia building in Melbourne, which is now the site of the Victorian Arts Centre, and there was a spirited and sometimes bitter struggle that ensued with Dan and Tom Fitzgerald when they were alive, as they were, at that time, Australia's leading circus proprietors. But the Wirths largely absorbed the rival company. The Fitzgeralds' management innovations and their customary presentation of a gold-mounted whip to the Melbourne Cup-winning jockey was continued with the Wirths. Wirth Circus always was in Melbourne for the Melbourne Cup and in Sydney for the Easter Show. They came to Brisbane annually in August at the time of the exhibition. In July 1910, the circus had a lion, 2 lionesses and 2 Russian wolves escape at Murrurundi in New South Wales. An article in the Clarence and Richmond Examiner in Grafton on the 9th of July 1910 said lions escaped from circus. A lion, 2 lionesses and 2 wolves escaped from a cage at Wirth Circus at Murrurundi. The lions attacked the circus horses. 1 lioness got into the town and attacked a horse, which was so severely injured that it is likely will have to be destroyed. The animals were recaptured. By 1911, they'd built a new circus hippodrome, a 5,000-seat auditorium and a roller skating rink, and they leased the original Olympia to Coast and Spencer as a cinema. The Sydney Council sought to replace the new Belmore markets around Campbell Street and Haymarket by 1912. The area was initially used by the Wirth Brothers Circus for 10 weeks in 1912 as a circus and hippodrome. This was successful and a 21-year lease was signed in September 1912. The company was incorporated in 1913 by Philip and George Wirth after they received an inheritance from an American uncle. And in the Northwest Courier, a Narrabri paper, on the 7th of May 1913, it outlines this. Another Australian millionaire. Mr. George Wirth of Wirth Brothers Circus, which is now showing on the Southern Line, received a pleasant surprise this week when he opened his American mail. Many years ago, Mr. Wirth's uncle left Germany for the United States in order to make his fortune. He succeeded in doing so to the extent of $20 million, or roughly speaking in English money, about £4 million. For a long time, the family had received no communication from him, and although they knew him to be in exceedingly prosperous circumstances, they had no idea that his bank account bordered on the millions. However, Mr. George Wirth received a letter from his uncle's solicitors in Chicago stating that the old man had died and left a huge sum of £4 million to his 5 brothers, one of whom is the father of George and Philip Wirth. One of the brothers being dead, this makes one's share £1 million. During World War I, some of the buildings were used as nursing homes for soldiers and nurses. The company opened the new Wirth Brothers Hippodrome in April 1916, which was built for £40,000 by the Sydney Municipal Council and leased to the brothers. Elephants and seals, theatre and vaudeville shows. Although performing with some success for a decade, the Hippodrome failed financially. By 1926, Wirths had decided to seek the remodelling of the buildings as a picture palace. In September 1917, a lion and a lioness, by means unknown, were able to get loose at Campbelltown, New South Wales. In the Wagga Wagga Daily Advertiser on the 3rd of September 1917, it outlines that the lionesses escaped from Circus in Sydney. 2 lionesses escaped from Wirth Brothers Circus at Camperdown yesterday and threw the town in chaos. A band of men armed with rifles held the animals at bay for several hours before they were cornered. One made a dash at a horse, hurling it to the ground. 2 shots were fired without effect. The animals were eventually captured. During the 1920s, a new Green Mill dance hall replaced the Jazz Pavilion and the Olympia Dancing Palace. In 1923, George Wirth's favourite elephant, Jumbo, had to be shot when it went rogue in Brisbane. The article stated, Circus elephant shot. Brisbane on the 1st of July. Wirth's circus elephant, which badly mauled the ringmaster, W. Cook, on Friday night, was shot today by the direction of management. The animal, which was 33 years old, had been in the possession of Wirth since he was 5. At different times in the last few years, he has given cause for alarm. Therefore, after Friday night's exhibition of temper, it was deemed advisable in the interests of safety to execute the elephant. The animal was secured from India. And in the Sydney Smith's Weekly on the 12th of April 1924, I did an article on the history of the Wirth Circus, saying it was now in its 44th year. Not to date has there been a circus in Australia with a history remotely approaching that established by the Wirths. There were 4 brothers, John, Harry, Phil and George. George was born in Ipswich, Harry in Armidale, New South Wales, Phil in Beechworth, Victoria and George in Sydney. The father, John Wirth, himself an old circus man, hence the diversity in the boys' birthplaces. After some juvenile circus ventures, John, Harry, Phil and George got into business proper with a little tent show on New Year's Eve 1880, a few yards from where the Hippodrome in Sydney now stands. The 4 of them comprised the show, tumbling, horizontal bars, contortion, club swinging and the trapeze, single and double. Further, they supplied the band, the lot of them playing outside prior to the performance and changes taking place inside as the players were required in the ring. They continued there till competition, due to the success with which they were meeting, compelled them to take it on the road. Meanwhile, they had been able to engage a few other performers. Penrith was the first town they played. Within 6 months, they had their first horse ready for the ring. The Bob Walker Act was what they did with him. They worked down through New South Wales into Victoria. Year by year, they were growing stronger and stronger, with the result that in 1888 they had 46 wagons, 125 horses and 70 hands. Of course, the horses were mostly service horses, the term for distinguishing them from the horses used in the ring, known in the profession as performing horses. So in 1888, they travelled the show by train for the first time, through Bendigo, Geelong, Ballarat, Bendigo and back to Melbourne. Then, before the end of the year, they got rid of their service horses, and rail and boat have been the thing ever since. They also visited New Caledonia in 1888. From 1883, the circus is performed annually in every capital city in Australia. The first animal attraction the Wirths had was the riding goat Beverley in 1889. Beverley it was called because that was the name of the town in West Australia where they got it. Compare with this of some of their later day features, for example the presentation in which figured 12 polar bears, 2 Russian bears and 2 Great Danes, secured from Karl Hagenbach from Hamburg and still standing as the most expensive importation ever seen in Australia. Today, in addition to their horses, performing animals and menagerie, the Wirths carry 50 artists together with 100 hands from the managerial staff to the attendants generally. The size of the show may still be better, gauged by the fact that for the tour of this state, which will follow the Sydney season, they have to engage for 3 months 2 special trains to take them from town to town. From 1880 to 1924, the Wirths have thus been continuous for 44 years, but they have not confined themselves wholly to Australia. They were in Africa for 2 years, South America for 18 months and England for 2 years. From England they went back to Africa, but this time they had to hurriedly leave as there was an outbreak of the Boer War. From Africa they played at India, China and Japan and returned to Australia in 1892 and have been here ever since. There is nothing to compare with a circus in being the sport of the elements. The Wirths have had to miss Narrabri, New South Wales 3 seasons running because of bad weather. They don't mind the rain so much, it's the winds that beat them, the blow that simply defies them to erect their canvas or it tears to pieces if they do not get it up. Phil and George have long had the circus to themselves. Would they, with all their experience, go through the same life again? Yes, is their reply on this point without a moment's hesitation, for they are circus men born and bred. They love the life. Further, with them, joy begets joy. The joy they give others, having, so to speak, its counterpart in the joy they thus come to feel themselves. The Hippodrome site was rebuilt in 1927 and it became the Capitol Theatre. With the Capitol Theatre's opening on the 7th of April 1928, the circus moved to a nearby site at Wentworth Avenue and Goulburn Street. By 1930, Wirth Circus was now operating on a 2-yearly national tour with the alternate year with a visit to New Zealand. One of the circus's most famous elephants was Princess Alice. Apart from an unsuccessful tour to Java in 1935, Wirth Circus confined its operations after 1900 to Australasia. George and Philip published autobiographies, Round the World with the Circus in 1925 and The Life of Philip Wirth in 1934. Wirths carried on initially under the stewardship of George Wirth. However, when he died childless in 1941, it was left to Philip's children to keep the show going through the difficult war years. Philip's daughter Doris took over as managing director, her sister Eileen as equestrian director, and her brother Philip Jr. as ringmaster. Another sister, Madeline, trained the elephants. Manpower was short, imported acts were hard to find, and transport was a major problem. Trains were requisitioned for troop movements and fuel was hard to get. In 1940, Wirth's 7 elephants trudged the 1,000 kilometres between Melbourne and Sydney, travelling mainly at night to avoid the traffic. The circus was the only one allowed to operate during World War II in Australia. The troupe used Muston Park in Sydney as a performance area in 1942. After World War II, the painter Norma Bull travelled with the company painting scenes of circus life for 12 months. After the Second World War, the Wirths regrouped, refurbished and returned to the road in all its finery. But unfortunately it was not to last. In Melbourne, the Green Mill Dance Hall closed in 1950 and the remainder of the Wirth buildings on the site, including the old wooden Olympia, valued at £70,000, were destroyed by fire in December 1953. In the 1950s, the company used 2 Victoria Railways wooden bogie passenger carriages as accommodation. The circus staff complained about the poor conditions of the carriages, which were by this stage were over 60 years old, and in 1962 they were withdrawn. Rising transportation costs, television, and competition from other leaner, more adaptable travelling shows finally brought Wirth's long journey to an end. It ground to an inglorious halt in Kingaroy, Queensland in May 1963, amid a flurry of summonses for unpaid tax. In the Sydney Sun, Vince Kelly lamented, "The changing times have clearly been hard times for the circus, which it seems is guilty of owing money to the nation. Young Australia and the young at heart are remembering today that the nation owed something to the Wirths." Doris Wirth added, "People just while away their lives in front of the silver screen. They're living on coffee and biscuits. They buy nothing. They go nowhere. We just didn't get the crowds we used to." In 1998, Alice Grant, who'd performed with the Wirths from 1940 to 1954, unveiled a colourful commemorative mosaic on the wall of the Victorian Arts Centre in St Kilda Road, a fitting reminder to a great Australian institution on the site of its long-time Melbourne home. And there are Wirth family films that have survived. The National Film and Sound Archive of Australia acquired approximately 50 home movies and several audio recordings, a majority that have been donated by the direct descendants of the Wirth family and linked back directly to George and Philip Wirth. The collection covers 1925 to the 1950s. As seen in the films, George is a small but well-built man who loves swimming and could still do a backward somersault in his late 60s, whilst Philip has a much broader frame, is larger in height and often seen sporting a moustache and a bowler hat. George is presumed to have been the key home movie maker, with his wife Margaret being behind the camera when George is in shot. When George retired, he did become the director at Pagewood Film Studios, so the assumption is that they are the ones that took the films. George and Margaret extensively travelled overseas and took many home movies during their trip to the US, where they visited May Wirth, George's niece. And a lot of these clips are on YouTube or are linked with the Mark St. Leon collection that I will acknowledge and add links to with the episode details. Mark St. Leon is a descendant of the family. I'm sure as a child that you would have gone and enjoyed the circus, and it was very interesting to have an understanding of the Wirth circus history, but also what became of them and their children. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch.